corporate governance models have evolved differently across major markets because of variations in legal systems, ownership structures, economic development, cultural values, and historical experience. Although the fundamental objective of governance is to ensure accountability, transparency, and effective oversight, countries often pursue these goals through different institutional arrangements. Investors evaluating global companies must understand that governance practices are not universally identical and that what constitutes best practice may vary across jurisdictions. The CFA Sustainable Investing Framework emphasizes that governance analysis requires consideration of local contexts while recognizing common principles such as shareholder protection, board accountability, ethical conduct, and long-term value creation. One of the most widely recognized governance frameworks is the shareholder-oriented model, commonly associated with markets such as the United States and the United Kingdom. This model emphasizes maximizing shareholder value and protecting investor rights. Ownership is often dispersed among numerous shareholders, resulting in a separation between ownership and management. Boards of directors play a central oversight role, and governance mechanisms focus on accountability, transparency, executive performance, and shareholder engagement. Independent directors, active capital markets, and extensive disclosure requirements are important features. This model generally prioritizes efficiency and investor protection, although critics argue that it can sometimes encourage excessive emphasis on short-term financial performance. In contrast, many continental European and Asian markets have historically followed a stakeholder-oriented model of governance. This approach recognizes that corporations have responsibilities not only to shareholders but also to employees, customers, suppliers, communities, creditors, and society more broadly. Ownership structures are often more concentrated, with families, governments, banks, or large institutional investors exercising significant influence. Governance systems may include employee representation, long-term stakeholder relationships, and broader social objectives. Supporters argue that this model promotes stability, sustainability, and long-term strategic thinking. However, concentrated ownership can also create risks related to minority shareholder protection and potential conflicts between controlling and minority investors. A key distinction among governance models involves ownership concentration and board structures. In Anglo-American markets, dispersed ownership often necessitates strong board independence and extensive disclosure requirements to address agency conflicts between managers and shareholders. In contrast, concentrated ownership systems frequently rely on controlling shareholders to monitor management directly. Some countries employ one-tier boards, where executive and non-executive directors serve together, while others use two-tier board systems that separate supervisory and management functions. These structural differences reflect varying approaches to accountability and oversight. Investors must therefore evaluate governance effectiveness within the context of local institutional arrangements rather than relying solely on a single global governance template. The concept of best practice governance also varies considerably across markets. Certain principles, including board accountability, transparency, ethical conduct, effective risk management, and shareholder protection, are widely accepted. However, implementation often differs due to local economic, legal, and social conditions. For example, board diversity expectations, executive compensation practices, stakeholder engagement approaches, and disclosure requirements may vary significantly among jurisdictions. What constitutes effective governance in one market may not be directly transferable to another. As a result, investors increasingly adopt principles-based approaches that focus on governance outcomes while recognizing legitimate differences in implementation methods and market structures. Legislation and regulation are major factors influencing governance practices. Countries differ substantially in their legal systems, securities regulations, disclosure standards, shareholder rights protections, and enforcement mechanisms. Common law jurisdictions often emphasize shareholder rights and market discipline, whereas civil law systems may place greater emphasis on stakeholder protections and regulatory oversight. Regulatory requirements influence board responsibilities, executive remuneration disclosures, auditing standards, and investor protections. The effectiveness of governance frameworks often depends not only on the quality of laws, but also on enforcement capacity and institutional effectiveness. Investors therefore consider both formal governance rules and the practical realities of regulatory implementation. Culture and interpretation further contribute to variations in governance practices across global markets. Social norms, business traditions, attitudes toward authority, stakeholder relationships, and historical experiences influence how governance principles are understood and applied. Cultural factors may affect board dynamics, leadership styles, disclosure preferences, succession planning, and stakeholder engagement practices. Consequently, governance frameworks often reflect local values and expectations while still pursuing common objectives of accountability and value creation. For sustainable investors, effective governance analysis requires balancing universal governance principles with an appreciation of regional differences in legislation, culture, ownership structures, and interpretation. This nuanced approach enables more accurate assessment of governance quality, investment risk, and long-term corporate sustainability.